This week, we take a break between franchises and look at the animated series. No, not the actual animated series, but perhaps the best Batman movie ever made, Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
This Christmas, for the first time, America's most exciting and legendary motion picture hero comes to the screen like you've never seen him before. The Bat! In an all-new, larger-than-life feature film. Now, the Dark Knight confronts his newest and most menacing villain.
Your angel of death awaits.
The Phantasm.
I want you.
And faces his greatest danger.
Can't be too careful with all those weirdos around.
A soaring new adventure. Batman, Mask of the Phantasm. The animated movie. Coming for a Christmas you'll never forget.
My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985 here at Superhero Pantheon. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at the real world are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you could do so in 2 ways. First, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, find us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. And as you all know, we take one movie a week and we decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, in the pile of shame, or somewhere in between. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain and Brian. Last week we put Batman and Robin into the pile of shame, and it threw me off so much that I forgot to copy and paste the intro for this week, so that's why I had to improv a little bit, Brian.
Yeah, I can see why. A movie like that can kind of boil your brain and scramble your brain kind of like that and kind of mess with you. But we're moving on from that, and we're moving on to some greatness because Batman the Animated Series is one of the all-time great animated shows of all time, like, for real. And I know as a kid I never really appreciated it. I don't know about you, Jerome, but for me, I don't know. I guess I just didn't understand it as a kid. I didn't have that attention span as a kid. But growing up, watching it back in my early 20s, binging it a while ago, every single episode up until the end, it's an amazing show. It's an amazing run. It's visually spectacular. It holds it still stands the test of time. It's got this timeless feel. It's amazing, and the movie captures that even more so. Like, I think they did a little more. Than the show, with the show having a bigger budget. Basically, they did a little more. So I thought it was great. So all-time greatest Batman movie, not sure on that one, but I do have some issues with the script. But that's only because some issues with the production, actually.
And this movie is 25 years old. It opened up on Christmas Day, 1993, and this is something that was pretty unprecedented to have an animated show, which was very popular on Fox Kids, get a theatrical release. And it's pretty amazing to think about just how popular Fox Kids was at this point. Between Batman the Animated Series, they were also airing X-Men, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and these shows were not just popular with kids, but we're talking about they were airing in prime time on Fox at certain points, and that's just something you really don't see. And the fact of the matter is, if you turn Fox on Saturday morning, there are no cartoons. If you turn a lot of stations on, they're either running infomercials or they're running live-action/adult programming. And in order to find kids programming, you really have to go to your Cartoon Networks, your YouTubes, your Netflixes. I don't think people really appreciate the wonders that was Saturday morning cartoons. And Batman was kind of a byproduct of that, even though it didn't really air on Saturday mornings. It was more of a weekday, Monday through Friday thing. And the basic concept is that they did not tell or adapt any stories from from the comic books. They would tell a series of their own stories. They would basically have their own origins for some of the characters, including Two-Face, which was one of the better episodes that they ever did. And this is something that ran for a number of years, and they had about 100 episodes, even changing networks and changing some of the animation style. I certainly don't think the second run of shows that they did on the WB Kids were as memorable or as good, but I still think there are some really amazing episodes that maybe we'll get into at some point. But as far as this goes, this is technically not an adaptation of one particular story, but it is a combination of Batman Year 1 and Batman Year 2. The flashback to Batman's first night of crime fighting, donning a jacket and ski hat, is parallel to Book 1 of Year 1. The design and concept of the Phantasm was derived from the Reaper, who is the primary villain of Year 2. Originally, this was supposed to be a straight-to-home video release, just as the DCU still produces the straight-to-DVD, straight-to-VOD animated releases, which vary in quality, but most of them have a tendency to be very good. But late in production, Warner Brothers decided to make this a theatrical release, and while the animators were thrilled and extremely grateful for the decision, they had less than a year of production time and scrambling to convert the aspect ratio to widescreen, and that is a really big deal when you're talking about animation. And I think in some ways, when you look at this and you watch the animation, it might seem almost archaic and childlike to some people, but the reality is that this was pretty advanced and pretty great for its time, and I think it really captures kind of the timelessness of Gotham City. One of the big things that you will notice is just how computer-generated Gotham City looks, especially in the opening credits. This was originally designed for the TV show. The purpose was to create a virtual set to replace hand-painted backgrounds and help speed up production of the series, but it was never used for that purpose. This is the only comic book film nominated for an Annie Award for Best Animated Feature. And Brian, you might think, well, this is really good. It should win. Unfortunately, it came up against The Lion King, and in that situation, I can understand losing to The Lion King, which is an all-time great Disney animated film.
Absolutely, and you kind of went over the history of the show right there, and you kind of forget that, like, Paul Dini, part creator of the show, he also created, Harley Quinn, and Harley Quinn comes from the show. People don't even realize that. So I thought that's one of those interesting things that I didn't even realize until years ago. I just assumed she came from the comics, but she was created for the show. And it's become iconic since then, and it's been adapted into the comics since then. And even Paul Dini himself actually wrote like a direct kind of comic. I forgot the name offhand, but we'll probably mention it in the notes. But yeah, she got this comic, and it's kind of iconic for Harley Quinn, and it all became, stems from the show. So this show has a lot of history to it because it's so good that even the comics took from it. So I do like the aspect of it that they had original stories. They did original things and created original characters and made it its own unique feel, because if you look at the comics at the time, the comics still kind of reflected the current pop culture era. In this case, like Batman the Animated Series kind of creates its own pop culture. It's pretty much like they never give a year, they never give distinctions on technology. So this idea of its own kind of world, and then you can kind of create within that world, it paid off because it gave the show like kind of limitless possibilities on the storylines and how they could do things. The fact that they stretched out the Two-Face thing over several episodes was kind of great, because you would think that at a kids show they would just do like a 1-2-parter episode where he just becomes, you introduce Harvey Dent one episode, at the end of the episode you turn into Two-Face, and then basically Batman has to face Two-Face, right? But in essence, they built up those episodes before the turn. So stuff like that you can do with a show like this. It's great. So I'm glad that they got the chance. The problem is that it's clear that this was like a straight to VHS movie, and because of the time frame and the time they were given, they had to focus on that aspect ratio thing. Basically, if they didn't do the aspect ratio change, it would have been a full frame movie in a theater with the black bars on the side, and it would have been pretty ugly. So that was their main concern there. My concern was that the script, I mean, you could have expanded it. The movie's only an hour and 16 minutes, and they're going to put this movie in theaters. You figured they would expand it a little bit, but because of the time they were given, they were not allowed to do that. And you can kind of see where in the script they should have probably expanded more, told a little bit more story, give it a little more time on things, explain a little more things. But because of that kind of hinders the script a little bit, and that kind of hurts my score a little bit going down the line.
Right, and I think we could talk about some of the clunkiness of the ending. That's really the only issue that I have with the script, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes here. But you mentioned Paul Dini and Bruce Timm. They are two of the more well-known people associated with this, and Paul Dini intended each of the flashbacks into this, as this movie is heavily constructed around flashbacks, which we will also get into when we talk about Batman Begins. But this is dealing with Batman's love life, and in those flashbacks, things quote unquote have a tendency to get worse when you hope things will get better. And flashbacks, they take up a good portion of this film, and that is very different than a lot of the other Batman movies that we've seen up to this point with the original franchise. But while so many of the other movies in the franchise are so focused on the villain, in this case, you get a lot with Bruce Wayne, and I think that I'm mentioning Bruce Wayne because there really isn't a lot of Batman in this movie. I was shocked when I rewatched this just how little of Batman in the actual suit that we get. So much of this is focused on Bruce Wayne, and I think that's a good thing. What I think they really did such a good job of is they were able to focus so much on Bruce Wayne and Batman that they didn't really have to focus on the villain, except within the context of also focusing on Batman. And the villain in this case was Andrea Beaumont, who becomes the Reaper and, or I guess, the Phantasm. And what's fascinating to me about this is that it is a female who is actually the villain, and this is one of the rare times that you see this happen. And she, Andrea Beaumont, who is Bruce Wayne's love interest during the flashback. She is, of course, a combination of those characters that I mentioned earlier from Batman Year 2 and that comic book storyline. She was voiced by Dana Delaney, who is an actress who's been in a number of movies and television shows, but her voice performance was so good in this that she was eventually cast to be Lois Lane on Superman, the animated series, which I've never seen before. Brian, I don't know if you've ever watched Superman, the animated series, but I have not.
I've watched a few episodes. It's just hard to get into because it's like the same universe. It's basically they had this like extended universe that was like I think 4 years after Batman the animated series started, and it does have like a good run. I think there's like 60 episodes or something like that, and then it leads into Justice League actually, which is the big crossover, which is all still in the same universe, which is cool. But I don't know. It just didn't feel like as exciting. My friend actually binged it. He loved it. He said there's certain aspects of it that he likes, and he actually was not a big a fan of Superman, but the show actually made him a bigger fan of Superman. So I don't know what that says about the show, but I mean, for me, I was kind of disinterested. So I'll be honest about that.
At some point, I will have to get into Superman. I have actually seen Justice League Unlimited. I've seen every episode of the Batman the Animated Series, and its sequel show as well, but never Superman, and that's something I need to do. Although the Joker is a part of this movie, one of the things that I loved is that the story does not focus around him or any other member of the regular Rogues Gallery. Alan Burnett, who was one of the main creators of the show, cited he wanted to do a love story with Bruce because nobody had really done it on the TV show. I wanted a story that got into his head. And again, this is also something that they don't necessarily get into in the first two Batmans either, is really focusing on Batman and Bruce Wayne. And I love the fact that the Joker is a supporting character in this, and he's not even the main antagonist. He is a kind of a foil for both the Phantasm and for Batman. And even though I do think that leads to a little bit of clunkiness at the end, I love the way that they kind of use Joker as a closer. Like in baseball, you have the closer who comes in and finishes the game up, and that's what they did here. They did not have Joker kind of starting off the film, but he appears about halfway through and plays a pivotal role, but it's not about the Joker.
What's also cool is like they have this little like history to him. They add a little history to him, like he was like a gangster years ago, apparently, right? That's the implication.
Right, and unlike in Batman 1989, he does not kill Batman's parents, though, which I think is a good thing that enough people complained about where I think it's worth just not connecting those two things together.
Right. So I thought it was really cool that they actually tied this in that, she wants revenge. We'll get into the story a little bit later, but basically she wants revenge on these gangsters, and it turns out Joker was one of those gangsters, so who knew? And then Batman didn't even realize until he looked really closely at a picture to figure out that it is the Joker in this picture. So that was really cool that they kind of tied him in and kind of gave him a little bit of a history and a backstory. Because I don't think we ever really got that in the show, right? The only backstory we kind of get is the most recent one with Killing Joke, right? Where they kind of show him as a comedian back in the day. So I thought that was really cool.
Absolutely. Technically, this is the first film set in the DC animated universe, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the DC animated universe a little bit later. But a lot of this movie does take place at the place of the fair. This was based on the 1964 New York World's Fair. The song playing is similar to There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow, which played in the Disney General Electric sponsored Progress Land. So I really like the design of that fair and the way that they were using it in the movie. I think it really works out well. Now you might be wondering, what about the Phantasm? The Phantasm would not appear in DCAU continuity until Justice League Unlimited Epilogue, and this was a real deep cut, because there is a point in which Amanda Waller tells the story of an agent she hired to kill the parents of young Terry McGinnis. Though the assassin is never named, the silent depiction of the event clearly shows the Phantasm stalking the family. However, a visibly aged Andrea Beaumont refuses to complete the assignment, citing Batman's refusal to resort to murder to achieve his goals, and how doing so would dishonor what he stood for. Can you imagine watching Justice League Unlimited and the Phantasm just comes up? I mean, you could tell the producers at that point were just throwing stuff at the wall because they were being canceled and they were going to come back. And to just throw the Phantasm out there as the possible murderer of Terry McGinnis's kids or parents, I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like what the MCU did with Red Skull, right? That kind of reminds me of that. And they kind of did it first. But when I first saw that, I think it was like 7 years ago at this point when I binged it and got to that point, and it was the last episode of Justice League, and they showed that, and I was just like, holy shit, that's from the freaking movie. So the fact that they, did that, I mean, it's great. I mean, like, I love full circle, me loving full circle moments, and that's a total full circle moment. And it goes to show you that Amanda Waller does not give a fuck, and like she'll go out and, well, we could talk about that later when we talk about Justice League. But Amanda Waller is like a tough SOB, and the fact that that Amanda or Andrea Beaumont, like still continued her like ways and went out and became like a contract killer. That still is pretty cool because we never hear from her again. You would just assume that like she just goes on and lives her life and kind of leaves it all behind her, but she embraces that and becomes kind of like the opposite of Batman.
All right, let's get to the actual categories at this point. And finally, we have a Batman origin story. This is the first of two that we're going to be discussing, as we'll discuss Batman even more next week, talking about his origin. And I think in this case, it is very much a love story. We get tons of Bruce Wayne not in the costume and dealing with the realities of life and the conflict of wanting to become Batman, but also falling in love with this woman, Andrea Beaumont. And we witness a very tragic story as Andrea's rejection of Bruce Wayne is what leads Bruce Wayne to finally pull the trigger and become Batman. We do get a couple of scenes with him struggling and defeating some of the bad guys, but not really having a costume, and eventually he comes to the decision to become Batman, and there is this great moment of Alfred, who does play a much bigger role in this movie. There is a lot of great banter between those two. I think that's what made the animated series so much better than even the Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher Batmans. Is there was so much banter, and it was, if things felt just more equal between the two, even though Alfred is, of course, a servant, but in this case, it just felt better. And there is this horrifying moment where it kind of reminds me of Joker 1989 when he asks for a mirror and we don't actually see his face, but we see the kind of the look of horror and the music. And this is very similar. Alfred looks at Bruce Wayne in the Batman costume for the first time and is horrified by what he sees. And that is probably the best moment in this movie, even from a visual perspective. Even though the animation, it's 1993, I think that moment still absolutely 100% works.
Yeah, it's haunting, and if you put yourself in Alfred's shoes, like seeing that for the first time, and seeing the tragedy and seeing the growth of Bruce Wayne, it's got to be like horrifying, right? So just seeing that suit for the first time from the darkness, that's pretty haunting. So I'm glad they had that moment in it. I'm glad they gave Alfred so many moments in this movie. Just him like being the father figure. I want more of that, Alfred. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of like the one, little thing that I liked about Batman and Robin is that little aspect or that little fatherly son relationship, that they had going on, and then Christopher Nolan pretty much expands on that and builds on that in his trilogy, which I love, and that's one of the reasons I love that trilogy. But here you see that moment when even at the end, I know we're kind of jumping ahead to the end, but at the end when he's consoling Bruce Wayne, like he doesn't call him Batman, he calls him Bruce, and they're having this heart to heart moment, and it's great. So I'm glad that they gave him so much more to do because in the show, like he doesn't have much to do. He'll have some occasional, like he'll have to make a phone call here or there, or rescue here or there, something like that. 2 minutes here and there on the show, but that's it. Here he got a lot of time and a lot of cool, genuine drama, emotional moments that really builds the character. It's cool that we see Batman in all these flashbacks. I just kind of wish they went full Batman Year One, because like I wish that they kind of went in order, at points, because the flashbacks and going back and forth. I thought it should have been just a straight narrative. Sometimes I thought that would have been easier to digest, but maybe that's just because like that was kind of like Batman Begins. But here, like you see Bruce Wayne being vulnerable, so it's really it's of all the episodes on Batman the Animated Series, you hardly see him this vulnerable. So it's kind of unique, and I'm glad that they told this unique story because you never see this out of Bruce in the show.
Certainly not. And there is no better place to talk about Kevin Conroy as the voice of Batman. And I say the voice in all caps because I think for so many people our age and maybe even a little bit younger, this is the voice of Batman when they're reading comics or when they're reading books. This is the voice that they hear. And this is because of all of the time spent on multiple TV shows. Not just Batman the Animated Series, but also Batman Beyond as the older Bruce Wayne on Justice League, Justice League Unlimited. He was also playing Batman throughout some of the movies, all the way even until The Killing Joke. It's Kevin Conroy playing this role. And in so many ways, I think he is the best Batman that we have heard and we will probably ever hear. And it's because of the way that he is able to balance the two voices of playing Bruce Wayne very differently from Batman. And whereas I think Christian Bale got a lot of crap for the way that he used the Batman voice, I think Kevin Conroy is able to modulate his voice. Part of that is because he's a voiceover actor, undoubtedly, but he's able to modulate his voice to where Batman does not sound like a monster, but he also sounds distinctive from Bruce Wayne. It would be very difficult to hear the two and to be able to make that connection unless you hear from them a lot. And I love the way that he plays Bruce Wayne, and he nails all of the moments, and he nails the humor of Batman in a lot of cases and in a lot of the episodes. Not every episode is super serious. I think there's some that are meant to be a little bit more humorous. I think he nails those. I think he nails the tragedy, which I think this story is very much a tragedy. It is a tragedy of a person becoming Batman because of these external factors and the fact that if he had gotten to marry to Andrea Beaumont, maybe he would not be Batman, or maybe he would get divorced or something. But it is a very different portrayal, and Kevin Conroy has nailed this character in so many different iterations. And if we were to make a list and we were to talk about Kevin Conroy as being the best Batman, I would have a very hard time arguing against that.
Yeah, that's so true on so many levels because every time I read a comic book or a graphic novel of Batman, I immediately hear his voice, and that's because of the show and probably because of this movie as well. So, is there anyone we're missing? I think that's pretty much it. Even though technically, I don't know, Gordon is in this movie for like a couple minutes, but he's not doing much anyway, which kind of sucks because he's got so much more prominence in the show, which I think, I don't know, maybe just because of the timing of everything, that it was designed to be a directed, VHS movie anyway, that they figured, well, they've seen enough of the kids probably have seen enough of Gordon, so they probably limited his role here, but it's kind of disappointing he wasn't in it as much.
I think it's hilarious just how little he's in it and how he is basically washing his hands of the whole movie. Even though he's washing his hands of the whole situation, it's like he doesn't want to be in the movie. Which I don't know if that's a meta moment or something or what, but that was genuinely amusing to me.
Which is weird because that character is so good on the show, and I don't know the voice actor offhand, but he's a great Commissioner Gordon as well. Like he gets that voice down, so kind of disappointing in that respect. But your score is going to be What?
A 9. I'm giving this a 9 because I think Kevin Conroy is spectacular in this role. I think Alfred is really good, and I guess my only nitpick is the lack of Commissioner Gordon and the lack of any other protagonists in this movie. But overall, I mean, this is one of the strongest performances, and that should not be a surprise given the way that Bruce Wayne is portrayed, because we get to see him as a 3D human being and not just in the movie for 15 minutes. And this is very different from the Tim Burton Batmans in a good way, and we see so much more of Batman in every way, and that's why I'm giving this a 9.
I'm gonna go with an 8. I wasn't totally blown away, but I mean, Kevin Conroy, he's just amazing as Batman, so it's hard to take that away from him. But I just wasn't totally blown away. But that's, it's an 8 out of 10 is still good.
All right, let's go to the villains. I think the way that I see it is Andrea is a decent person turned by the murder of her father. She is the opposite of Batman in that she could have very easily gone in a different direction, but she has decided to basically become a murderer. She becomes the Phantasm and takes out the criminal element. Some in Gotham, including City Councilman Arthur Reeves, believe Batman is behind the murders, so we get a little bit of drama about who is actually doing this. I'm not sure if the mystery aspect totally works, but I do love the criminals as solid background. You've got Salvatore Villastra, who is voiced by the legendary Abe Vigoda. He is so concerned that he hires the Joker, who is, of course, voiced by Mark Hamill, who was in the gang at one point. The voice actors on the villain side are really, really impressive. And, of course, Abe Vigoda is an icon in Hollywood based off of his roles in so many movies and TV shows. And Mark Hamill is almost in a tougher position than Kevin Conroy because Jack Nicholson and Heath Ledger have both played the Joker. So I think it says a lot that I still consider Mark Hamill to be one of the best Jokers, even though Heath Ledger won a freaking Academy Award. And Mark Hamill has also been Luke Skywalker. So for him to play the Joker so well and to do it so well in this movie as a supporting character, the villain side is pretty damn great on this end.
Yeah, I mean, his laugh is like the most iconic Joker laugh, right? It's not too over the top. It's still creepy in a sense. So to me, he just gets it down. And I never knew he was Joker until, like, I don't know, I was like in high school or something. You know what I mean? I was like, Luke Skywalker's not the Joker, because I wasn't really familiar with his like voice actor work. So when you look it up, it's just kind of mind blowing because it's like a total opposite, you know what I mean, of Luke Skywalker and the Joker, two complete opposites on the spectrum, and he nails it. And with his roles over the years, he can play those roles anywhere in between on that spectrum. So I think Mark Hamill's a really underrated, underappreciated actor, I think, and him. I mean, I love him as like Skips in a Regular Show, and that's kind of like a shout out to Regular Show. And there was just one episode there where they just focused on his character because Mark Hamill's just so good, and they made a whole episode about his character, and it was one of the best of the whole show. So that's a credit to Mark Hamill for kind of just taking over a show like that. But that's just the way he is because he's just so good at voice acting. And here he almost kind of takes over the movie at the end because the villain role kind of switches over. Like it's hard for me to consider Andrea as a villain. You know what I mean? Like I still see her as like kind of like this in between, maybe even a hero. You know what I mean? Like she's just getting vengeance where I feel it's necessary, almost kind of like I don't know, probably like what's his name, Arthur from season one Arrow. You know what I mean? Just taking vengeance here and there and kind of taking the right kind of vengeance. I kind of see that, so I don't know. I kind of rationalize with that, but I guess that just makes her a good villain because you're kind of sympathizing with her. Because in the end, like she gets away with it, and Batman even lets her get away with it with all the murders. So it's a very strong role for her, and it's kind of eye-opening, and you kind of see Batman just let her get away with it because he's kind of vulnerable and in love with her, so he doesn't know what to do. So it's hard to see Batman like that, where he just lets her get away. You know what I mean? Even though he knows she killed like 3 people, like cruel, like very cruel, vicious murders too. So it's crazy.
I mean, I'm not sure how much he ultimately lets her get away. I guess in the first, kind of the false ending, she kind of gets away, but in the second one, she is battling with the Joker, and there's an explosion that kind of separates them. So I think that's basically what happens there. And I hear what you're saying about Andrea and whether she's a villain or not. I think, again, coming back to this idea of tragedy, and that's the way that I think this movie is trying to portray both Andrea and Batman is that they are both tragic figures. Batman is making this vow to clean up the streets of Gotham, and he is not murdering people and not taking it out. And Andrea, on the other hand, is all she is doing is pure vengeance, and it's kind of breaking her, and that's the conflict that we're getting here. As far as the score goes, I think from a villain perspective, I still think this is really strong. I'm giving this a 9 because I think the way that they handle Andrea is spectacular. I love the supporting roles. I don't think we've talked about Councilman Arthur Reeves, but the actor behind him he was in Die Hard, and he's great. And Abe Vigoda plays a great Salvatore Valestra, and Stacy Keach plays a great father. He is Mr. Beaumont in this movie, and I think he does a great job both as him and as the Phantasm. And that was kind of the alleged twist of the movie, is that the same person who voiced the father also voiced the Phantasm. And I'm not sure it totally works. I'm still not sure the mystery element works, but I think the portrayal of the villains is excellent, and that is why I'm giving this part a 9.
I'm gonna go with an 8, just because I feel like I wanted more of the heavy focus on, the Phantasm. I think they revealed it maybe like 5 to 10 minutes too early, and maybe saved it for like the last 10 minutes. They revealed it around like, I don't know, there's like 20 minutes left, and I didn't like the idea that Joker figured it out first before Batman. That didn't, that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, just because I want Batman to be the world's greatest detective, and he didn't figure it out. I don't know if there was a moment that he did figure it out, and they kind of just didn't allude to it. But the first time they mention on camera and the reveal is what they say that Joker figured it out, and he does say he figured it out. So that was kind of weird. But yeah, I'm gonna stick with my 8, and just weird with the Die Hard references, because I literally watched this after I watched the Avengers re-release, and I saw the deleted scene with not Carl Winslow, but the actor that that cop actor from Die Hard and Family Matters appeared, and that was the deleted scene. And then just hearing this voice, and I'm like, is that the dude from Die Hard? So all this Die Hard references coming back to me, and it's not even Christmas.
It is certainly not, although this did come out again on December 25th, 1993.
That's what I was going for.
All right, let's talk about the story. I think there's so many great moments that I just want to highlight. Bruce talking to his parents at the grave. Every time he does it, I think it's so effective because it's basically Kevin Conroy acting against nothing, and I think it's really impressive, some of the things that he says. Especially, I think the line that really sticks out the most is, "I didn't count on being happy." And I think that's something that even differentiates this from Batman Begins. I think with Batman Begins, there's almost an inevitability to his character. But in this, there is a clear fork in the road and which direction he can take. And based on what happens with Andrea, he kind of takes this tragic turn. The first time that we see the Joker, I love the introduction, and because it's kind of meant to, not a swerve necessarily, but it's kind of meant to be this unexpected moment. I love the moment with Batman being chased by the police and becoming unmasked and desperately having to be saved by Andrea. I think that is probably one of the best scenes in the movie, and it was actually something I was expecting to see in The Dark Knight Rises, or even at the end of The Dark Knight, but we did not get that. So this was obviously fantastic. The Joker Phantasm stuff at the end, I think is very clunky and unclear, because at first it seems like the Phantasm leaves, and then she comes back, and we kind of get this three-way, this triple threat that I don't think necessarily works. I do like the moment with Andrea and Batman staring at each other and realizing what both of them have become. And then the ending, which I think if you watch the 1989 Batman, you see the end of that movie and the way that he looks at the bat signal. It's almost like this noble thing that he's doing. But again, in this way, it is portrayed as being more tragic than anything. And we kind of see him solemnly accepting what his life is. And I think there's something very powerful. And again, this is the animated kids movie that is doing this, not the Tim Burton or the Joel Schumacher Batmans. And I do like the credits start as we zoom into Batman's cape. Keep this in mind for next week. I love the flashbacks as they really contribute to the story. I think my main problem with flashbacks, this is something that a lot of this is something a lot of superhero TV shows and movies have really relied upon to tell their stories. And in certain ways, I think it's good. In this case, I think it's excellent. I think some TV shows kind of overuse it, cough, cough, arrow. But I think that they do a great job here from a story perspective.
Yeah, I love the flashbacks too, and that's what made me want a Batman Year One. Like, if because a lot of it was just coming from Batman Year One, you know what I mean? Those flashbacks, and I wish that they just went in order because it kind of throws me off. It takes me back because I was getting into the whole criminal story and all that kind of thing, and then it goes with the flashbacks, and then I get they're trying to tie it together, but I kind of wish they just went in order because I think it would have been more effective. That's kind of like my only criticism because like I don't know. And the other thing is like with the design of the flashbacks, it's hard to tell because of this timeless feel. You know what I mean? Like whenever we see a flashback in a movie, we clearly tell it's a flashback based on like the setting and like the time frame and like the background and what they're wearing and the costumes and stuff. So that was my only thing. It's like it's hard to distinguish the flashbacks too in terms of like the set and the look of it. I wish they would have made it more distinctive. You know what I mean? Maybe like added a little more cloudiness to the frame, kind of make it more of like a flashback, kind of like a memory kind of thing because that's like my only criticism because it's just hard to kind of distinguish in terms of the visual style, and I always want that distinction in the visual style of of a flashback and the current timeline. um, and in terms of the ending, I just felt like Joker kind of took over when I felt like the focus should have been more on Andrea. And I still have some questions like where did she get the like where did she get the mask, where did she get the costume, and like where did she get the gas, and how did she like, you know what I mean? Like, what was more of her background? I guess she was just the daughter of a gangster, and she kind of just learned on her own, became like just kind of taught herself, I guess. But I feel like because of the fact that they released it in theaters and this was supposed to be a VHS release, that there should have been more time to establish all these kind of things, and that's why I want like 10 more minutes of like establishment of her character and her background and that kind of thing. But we never really get that, and we kind of just have to assume and kind of jump ahead. So that's kind of my only criticism of that. And I just feel like Joker kind of just took over the movie at the end when the focus should have been on those two.
I can kind of see that. I don't know. I don't always need to know the origin, especially of villains. I think with the heroes, sometimes it can be compelling, sometimes it can work out, but sometimes I think when you do too much background and you're trying to give away too much information, it feels superfluous. I think I've seen enough prequels to where I don't necessarily need to know the origin of everything that's going on. I think of the Alien prequels and I think of Solo. Those were kind of nebulous and pointless, and I didn't need to know all of that information. And I think the way that the origin story is told from Batman's perspective, I think it really works out because again, this is a character that's been around for so many years. He is a protagonist. I think this works out. I think the way the Batman begins, I think it actually doubles down on the origin aspect, and I think it does an even better job. But here, I just think this is meant to be Batman's story, and you could have made this movie 10 minutes longer, and it probably, maybe, still could have worked. But I appreciated the economical aspects because I think one of my complaints about movies in general is sometimes they could be 10 to 15 minutes too long, and in this case, I don't think that was the case. So for all those reasons, my story score is an 8.
I'm gonna go with a 7. It's still really solid and good and has a lot of great aspects to it. I just felt like they could have expanded more and explained a little more and kind of restructured a little bit of the plot, but still effective nonetheless.
All right, let's get to the technical aspects. I love the opening credit sequence. I love the score. It is a banger. It is a fucking banger, man. The way that they use music in this movie is just spectacular. They kind of take the Tim Burton theme and they kind of modify it. And I loved just how different it sounds at certain points, too. I'm not sure that the animation holds up as well because of the technical advancements, but I still think it looks pretty damn great. And I love that the runtime is short, but there's no wasted scenes. There are no wasted moments throughout this movie, so that means the editing, I think, is very, very good. And for all those reasons, I think this still really holds up for the most part. And again, that score just adds so much. And for all those reasons, I'm giving this an 8.
Yeah, that score, man. Like you talk about like that beginning where I mean I know it's like CG and they do 3D animation for the opening for the buildings and stuff, but still like if you just kind of put yourself in 93 and not seen that before, that's still pretty ahead of it, Look good for 93, I think. And then the fact that they added this like low key kind of like choir, I don't know if you heard that for the theme at the beginning. It was fucking dark and haunting, and it kind of sets you up for this dark kind of story. So I thought that was a great way to kind of like settle you in, and then just that beginning scene where you see the casino and you see this like one shot of like the bridge between the two buildings connecting from the casino to the parking lot, and they just like show the city in the background, man, and it was just like wow, you know what I mean? Like they really have this like scale perspective in mind where like they just make the city look bigger just from certain angles and stuff like that, and I love that. And the only thing is like the colors are always going to be dark in Batman the Animated Series. I've accepted that, so you're not going to get a lot of bright colors in this, but still like the style is just so timeless. You know what I mean? So, and the music is fantastic. Editing, like like I mentioned before, that's more of a story script kind of thing where I wanted more, of a straight narrative. Maybe no flashbacks, just go in order. But I'm gonna give it a 9 just because it's still like stunning to watch. You know what I mean? And I watched it on my laptop. I didn't get the Blu-ray in time, but man, I really want to get the Blu-ray now just to watch the first 2 minutes again.
All right, and the legacy. I have to connect the legacy of this movie with the animated series. This animated series is hugely influential and popular because it started the DCU. The DCU is still going on to this day. There's still movies being released about Batman, Superman, and all of the other DC characters 26 years later. Batman is, of course, the most adapted character of all time, but the fact that Kevin Conroy is even still doing his voice 26 years later, I think speaks to that. This did not have a great box office, and I think you almost have to ding it just a little bit for that. But this was a huge hit on home video, going back to the VHS days, and I think many still consider this to be one of the best Batman movies. If you go back and read Roger Ebert's review of all the Batmans, this was the one that he liked the best of the first 5 or 6 that were made. I think for many people, Mark Hamill is the voice of the Joker, and Kevin Conroy is the voice of Batman. And you can clearly see Christopher Nolan taking inspiration from this film with the flashbacks, with some of the origin stuff, and maybe some other things that we'll point out. But it's very clear that this was so influential to a lot of people. And I don't know if you realize this, Brian, but Tia Carrera sings over the closing credits.
Um, Man, that's such a random pull. Like that's the same year True Lies came out almost.
It is 1990s icon Tia Carrera with a song on the Batman Mask of the Phantasm soundtrack. I'm giving this a 9.
See, it's hard for me because I really have to make that distinction of the show and the movie. You know what I mean? Like I'll have to judge this based on the legacy of the movie, and I'll have to judge it as like a cult kind of classic. Because even though it did make it broke even basically, but it made extra money in the rentals and stuff like that. But I do recall like working at Blockbuster for 4 years and renting this movie out like I don't know, probably like once a month. You know what I mean? Like it was that, and not just the kids. Like it was like like teenagers. You know what I mean? Early 20s people. So this definitely has this kind of influence around that time. You know what I mean? Because it's not for kids. Like let's be clear about this. It's a kids movie, but we watch this movie and the dark stuff we talked about and the murders and stuff like that, and the fact that one of the violent murders was pushing a giant ass statue on someone in a ditch 6 feet in the ground and getting squashed by that statue. Just that's incredibly violent for a kids movie. So um, to me, this is more of like a cult thing for like when you're in your late teens, early 20s, and when you binge the show, you want to watch this too. So it's definitely got that feel to it. So I'm gonna give it a 7, just based on the movie alone. The show, I mean, it's got a legacy of like 11 out of 10. You know what I mean? But the movie itself, it's kind of forgotten. But over the last like 10, 15 years, because of social media and the internet, it's become this cult classic that people realize that hey, I missed this opportunity to watch this as a kid in the theater because I didn't even know it came out. So to me, it's going to be a cult animated classic.
I don't know. I don't think it's been forgotten. I'm not sure about that, and it's really hard to tell sometimes. But I think this is a beloved movie, very very closely attached, and I think that is reflected in my overall score as well, which is a 43.
See, mine's a 39, and that's very high and strong too. It's just that I did this weird perspective of like, did people forget about this movie? And it does feel like it because whenever we talk about like my friends, the Batman the animated series, it's hardly ever the movie. Then like at some points you bring it up and the people are like, there was a movie. So it surprises some people. I think more people are just associated in their minds with like the show and stuff like that. But I don't know because some people don't even remember who was the Phantasm.
I don't know. I mean, I think this is a conversation that we could probably have for hours, but I do want to get to the burning questions. And even though your score is a 39, this is still well into our superhero pantheon, as this received a score of 82 in total, which means Batman Mask of the Phantasm is the first Batman movie to go into the superhero pantheon. Though, Brian, I have a feeling it's not going to be the last.
I have a feeling we're going to say this like 3 weeks in a row.
Possibly four. We'll see. But I think it's very interesting that, once again, I've given a higher score than you on one of these Batman movies.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I just kind of feel like, like we kind of, remember the show and kind of associate with this movie. And then I always want to make that distinction, you know what I mean? Even when we did the 60s Batman, that still kind of had some legacy to it, because of the pop culture sense and all that.
All right, burning questions. This is the most important one. Is Kevin Conroy the best Batman?
Yeah, I mean it's hard because he's not doing the physical performance, and I don't want to take that away from him. But man, he is the voice of Batman. You can't take that away from him at all. So I mean, maybe Christian Bale's like that physical embodiment that we kind of remember from most people, well, especially my kind of current era. But he's definitely the all-time voice of Batman. Maybe number two would be Adam West.
Possibly. I'm going to say that Kevin Conroy is the definitive voice of Batman at the very least, and probably remains the best Batman performance up to this point. And we will see what Robert Pattinson can do, and that's something I'm very much looking forward to, and something we will discuss at some point in our review, and possibly one of the burning questions. Was the twist, quote-unquote, well executed?
Yeah, because the very first time I watched this, I didn't know what to expect. The setup was the father, but then when they revealed the father was dead, it was like, so who's the killer? And then, because of the way the Phantasm is drawn, it's like it's almost they're trying to convince you it's a male because of the way the physicality of the role and all that kind of thing. But it turns out she's just wearing some padding probably, and she's just a really an amazing physically gifted person that can kick ass as well. So that was the first time you see the twist. It's pretty effective, I think.
Was this a smart use of the Joker?
It's tough because, like I said, I just felt like he took over when maybe he should have had more of a lesser role. But I thought it was going to be a lesser role until he killed that dude, and then it got like completely out of control with the Joker again. But I'll say it was a great use. I'll say it's pretty good. Just give me more of the Phantasm.
Right, I can certainly understand that. I think up until the ending, I would definitely say yes, this is a tremendously smart use because he's not in the first half, but I think he's used well enough in that closer role. And I'm still going to overall say yes with some inhibitions. Favorite Abe Vigoda performance?
Oh, Godfather. Hands down. I know there was another one where he plays a weird old man or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's always going to be Godfather. Godfather's my all-time favorite movie, and, him being the traitor, yeah.
Yes, not to be a cliche, but of course it's going to be The Godfather every single time. Although I think his performance of just living, despite all the internet rumors constantly talking about him dying, that is almost a performance unto itself.
Let me double-check that. He's still alive?
He is dead. He is finally dead, but there were a number of times when the internet had reported him as dying even though he was still alive. This was like a meme or something very closely connected to that kind of culture.
I had to confirm because I, too, for like 10 seconds, completely forgot if he was alive or dead or not because of that same scenario for the past 10 years.
Absolutely. All right, the final question. Your favorite episode of Batman the Animated Series?
Okay, I had to look up the exact titles because I wanted to make sure I got them right. It's a tie. So first one is Beware the Grey Ghost, right? So it's the one where they do this meta thing where Batman's TV hero, as a kid, when he was a kid, he watched this show, The Grey Ghost, and The Grey Ghost is voiced by Adam fucking West. And it's incredible. It's so memorable. It's so meta that it just put a smile on my face the first time watching that and hearing it. I was like, oh my God, that's Adam West. And then it just becomes this delight. And it's a fun ride, and it's kind of this thing where they talk about TV as well and TV characters and stuff like that. But it's such a trip, and it's a tie with it's called Almost Got Him. It's the one where the villains are playing poker and talking about when they almost got Batman. I think it's like Two-Face, Poison Ivy, Joker, Harley Quinn maybe. I forget off the top of my head, but like it's an amazing concept where they just kind of tell different tales, very much like that Simpsons episode where they kind of break down and tell these different details in a single episode kind of thing. I love that concept and love the way they pulled it off and just the way that they're just all sitting there playing poker, reminiscing. It's one of those moments. It's like where you watch the Avengers get drunk kind of thing.
Almost Got Him is pretty much almost universally regarded as the best episode of the animated series. I think the other ones that I've really enjoyed is there is an episode from the WB Kids version that is basically a nightmare where Batgirl is killed and Commissioner Gordon turns on Batman and begins chasing him around, and that is a tremendous episode. It's very trippy, a lot of really good stuff there. There's a two-parter of Clayface that is really excellent and is really, really depressing in the end. I mean, just, you want to talk about tragedy. I mean, that's it right there. And yeah, there's just so many good episodes that it'd be very hard to list, but those are the ones that are most memorable to me. Now, there are a number of animated Batman movies, there are a number of animated Superman movies that we will eventually get to. Because, Brian, next year we are going to basically run out of superhero movies at some point in 2020. I'm not sure of the week, but at some point we're going to do that. And once we get finished with that, what are we going to do, Brian?
Well, we're going to review those DC animated movies, and I think we pretty much did the start right here. This is the unofficial backdoor pilot, I guess. Because, I mean, after this, it's what? I think it's Batman, Mr. Freeze, Sub-Zero, and then there's another one, and then it just kind of goes from there, and then it kind of eventually leads to the reboot in 2008, I want to say, where they kind of relaunched the DC animated universe. And then about 4 or 5 years later, they started this other sub-relaunch where they had a continuity of a bunch of movies being in the same universe, which we're at now, where, you know, the two Superman movies that we kind of saw back to back in the theaters earlier this year or last year, whatever it was, but it's all the same universe now, so they kind of have this continuity. So we can kind of dive into that and kind of talk about that, because there's some great animated movies that I think are just underrated and hardly anyone knows about, like the one where you go to the parallel Earth and you see the evil Justice League and you got like an evil Batman, Owlman kind of thing going on. That was a great movie too. And then you got Under the Red Hood. So many of them, but then there's like so many, you know, so-so ones. But we'll get through those as well.
Yeah, there's some definite clunkers in there, like Batman and Harley Quinn. The Killing Joke. Oh boy, those are not going to be as fun to talk about, but we will eventually get to all of them eventually. But for right now, congratulations to Batman, Mask of the Phantasm, getting into the superhero pantheon. I have a feeling next week's movie is also going to get in, as we will be discussing Christian Bale's first outing as Batman. Batman Begins.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, Batman Begins, man. I can't wait because I didn't know what to expect. Because the first time I saw that trailer, I was watching episode 3 in the theater, and the crowd popped, and I had no idea why. And then I looked it up, and I guess all these nerds at the time were really high on Chris Nolan, and apparently so that they were rightfully deserving to cheer, because I didn't know what was coming, and it was incredible.
Definitely, and we're going to talk about our memories seeing this movie, and thinking about Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker, because this shot him into the stratosphere to where he's one of the few directors that pretty much still gets to do what he wants because of how much movie these Batman movies have made, and how much movies like The Prestige and Inception and Interstellar made as well. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week for Batman Begins.